Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we're going to talk about gearing in patch 10.2 and the strategy you should be using with your crests, with your flight stones. Well, not really flight stones, those things are kind of fake resource. You have as much of those as you need, pretty much everybody does. But how you should use your crests, how you should use your revival catalyst charge, and how you should plan to improve your character, depending on how much you're playing the game, what sort of content you're doing, and what your goals are, right? When you want to maximize your character's power level. So I'm going to try and have this video give a couple different examples of different types of players that'll be reaching different points at different times. But of course, this may be a very different plan for you depending on exactly what you want to do. But I also want this to be a good way to kind of let you jump back in, catch up if you haven't been following the 10.2 PTR cycle, if you might have missed something about what's changing, because actually quite a bit is changed compared to 10.1 with the gearing process. So first of all, the Revival Catalyst is available on the first week of Season 3, which is next week, right? The 14th in America, the 15th in Europe. But instead of gaining a charge every week, it will only gain a charge every 2 weeks, so the second one won't be until the third week of the raid. In conjunction with the earlier opening of the Revival Catalyst, tier armor tokens will drop at the 1 to 3 rate relative to non-tier loot, which that was a change they made midway through Aberrus Farm to kind of help, because you had all the tier you wanted and now you were farming things like Chromatic Essence, and it sucked that half of those drops were just always going to be tier. So they reduced the drop rate from 1 to 1 to 1 to 3 of tier relative to non-tier, which added more non-tier to the drop pools. But this is actually a pretty sizable thing to be aware of for early raid, because previously, if you had a group of 30 people, you would have 3 pieces of non-tier or of tier loot guaranteed. And now you only have 1.5, which means only 1 is guaranteed. And then you've got a 50% chance of seeing the next piece of tier, which is a pretty sizable reduction in the amount of tier that the bosses themselves will be dropping. However, the free charge of the Revival Catalyst that every single person gets on the first week and every single person gets on the third week should still mean that 2-piece and 4-piece should be attainable by most types of players faster this season than it was last season, and a lot faster if you're not a raider, because, of course, Revival Catalyst is the primary way of getting those if you're not a raider. Now, if you played last season, the AOTC/Keystone Master/Challenger and PvP Omni token, the heroic tier piece that you can get for achieving any of those objectives, is still in the game. It's pretty hard to get Keystone Master in the first week. That's going to be like you have to be timing 21s. But if you are timing 15s, you'll get it on the second week, right? Because, of course, you need Tyrant and Fort score to be able to get it with the 15s. Otherwise, you need like 21s. So my suggestion for how to play around this is you should probably be somewhat conservative with your first charge of the Revival Catalyst. Don't spend it on the first week unless you are spending it on a pretty good item and it's making you a set bonus that's good, or you're spending it on a very good item that, like, you know, is like something you're definitely never going to replace and you'll be happy to turn into tier, something on ideally something on the myth track if that's something that you're going to be aiming for, otherwise something on the hero track. Speaking of the myth and hero tracks, that is the other big thing that is changing this tier, is that we are going to have the myth track in the game from the start instead of midway through, which means that high keys, Great Vault, and Mythic Raid, just straight up from the raid and from the vault, will drop items that can be upgraded all the way up to the equivalent of 450 from last tier. And if you're interested, there's this cool little graph that was posted on the Competitive WoW subreddit that shows where all these item levels go. I tend to not use this sort of thing too much because I find information displayed this way to not work too well for me, but a lot of people do find this sort of thing helpful. But the important thing, is that there's a myth track that has 4 steps all the way up to 480, 489, or maybe even, I guess 489. And then there's also the hero track, which now goes up an extra step as well. So hero items go up to hero 6 out of 6 instead of just hero 5 out of 6. So this is a pretty sizable change compared to last patch. And the implication of this is mostly that aspect crests are going to be more valuable than they were last patch. Last patch, every single aspect crest, every single item slot could only ever want 1 aspect crest, right? If you got some gloves, you were only ever going to find one good aspect crest to use on them. And then even if you got other gloves that you wanted to upgrade later, you could still just upgrade them for free without using the crest, right? So you got 10 aspect crests in the first week, and you were like, all right, I don't need these for anything, right? Like I'll use 4 of them to make a crafted piece, and I'll use 6 of them to upgrade stuff. And it was hard to find 6 things to upgrade with them in the first week. By the second week, people were talking about downgrading their aspect crest into worm's crest. And that will certainly not be the case this time around, because now every single item slot of yours has 4 aspect crests that it could use to get all the way up to its full potential. Whether or not you're somebody who earns that cap of aspect crests in the first few weeks, which obviously not everybody does. It comes from pretty high level content. And whether or not you're somebody who earns the kind of gear that requires aspect crest, it's still going to be something that you should be more cautious with spending early on. You still want to use them, right? You want to look at your crests, and you definitely don't want them to just sit unused. But within any given week, using these things on Thursday on a good item instead of on Tuesday on a bad item is absolutely something that you should be looking to do with aspect crest. Whereas back in season 2, you just send any aspect crest that would be worth using. Worm's crests have a similar thing as last patch, which is basically that if you're going to be able to do content that drops items in that Worm's crest upgrade range, Worm's crests are pretty valuable, and it's nice to be able to save having to use them. So try not to use Worm's crest if you're going to be able to do stuff like plus 20 keys or mythic raid. Try not to use Worm's crests on items at the bottom of the hero track and at the top of the champion track, or at the middle top of the champion track, right? So again, if we look at this graph, try not to use any Worm's crests on items in that 467, 470 range if you're able to do the plus 19, plus 20 keys, because those will drop you items at the 470 level as well, right? And that basically, if you use some of your Worm's Crest to upgrade something to 470, and then you drop it from an end of dungeon next week, you've kind of deleted those Worm's Crests. Now, all of this is further exacerbated by the fact that crests are less common. Like you get fewer of them per week than you did last tier. It's nice they're a currency now and all that, but you only get 6 upgrades per week compared to 10 per crest type from last patch. So they are very precious resources that should be used sparingly in the first few weeks. They should be used, but they should be used on the right things, right? Make sure that you are not going to put yourself in a position where you dunk a bunch of Worm's Crests into some bracers and then a 2-handed weapon drops and you're unable to actually upgrade it. That will be a large DPS or throughput loss for you. So yeah, look at that. That's, I think, a big thing to be aware of. The other thing to note is that crafted gear still has actually the same ratios for enchanted aspects and enchanted Worm's Crest as last patch. Last patch, my advice was to never craft an enchanted Worm's Crest, and I still think that's going to be true this time around. It's a little bit more competitive than it was last patch, but I still think you should never craft an enchanted Worm's Dreaming Crest if you have access to aspect crests. If you're somebody who's doing content that can drop aspect crest, the Worm's Crests should probably be used to upgrade gear rather than to create an enchanted crest. However, if you get access to an enchanted Worm's Crest from other means, which there's the Renown 20, and there's also probably going to be a Kill for Rock for an enchanted Worm's Crest quest from the campaign that'll probably come out on like the 21st, if it's at all like Razgeth and Sarkreth tiers. Those are fine to use. I mean, those are great to use. Those are much better than they were in previous patches, where it was kind of hard to get good value out of those things in previous patches. Obviously, they were kind of free, so you would use them if you had something to do them with. Now that's absolutely something to do. So if you can get your hands on one of the enchanted Worm's Crests for free, then you can basically say, all right, instead of using an enchanted aspect crest on this piece of gear and spending 4 aspect upgrades, I'm going to use this enchanted Worm's Crest instead that I got for free. That's the important part here, that I got for free. And that's going to mean that I drop 10 item levels on the crafted piece, but I gain 4 aspect upgrades, which will equal about 14 item levels worth of upgrading across the rest of your gear. In some cases, this isn't going to be worth because, especially for your first 2 crafts, the embellishments on them scale pretty well with item levels. Maybe you're just going to want to commit your aspect crest to that. But, it's a sizable commitment to commit your aspect crest now to the enchanted crest, because that's 60 of your 90 crests each week, which is, you know, two-thirds of your aspect crest income would go into doing this for the first and second weeks of the raid, which would only give you 4 upgrades elsewhere. So getting another 4 and downgrading one of your crafted pieces by 10 item levels might well be a trade-off worth doing if you can get your hands on one of those free Worm's Crest. I don't think it's worth it if you're having to give up 3 upgrades in the Worm's Crest range, though, as well as the Enchanted Aspect Crest like trade-off, right? So that is the key thing there. I wouldn't use those still. I still would try never to craft an Enchanted Worm's Crest if you are going to have access to the Enchanted Aspect Crest. One thing that is nice compared to previous patch is that if you do content that would award an Aspect Crest and you're already capped on it, you instead get awarded Worm's Crest, which is great. That's a huge nice thing. It means there's no need to farm lower level content. You can just farm whatever content you're doing, and if you're farming stuff that drops Worm's Crests, once you finish farming it, you will get Drake's Crest instead, and all the way down. Speaking of Drake's Crests, Drake's and Whelpling's Crests, I think, still fall into the category of use these on anything that is even medium good. If you're somebody who's going to get access to Aspect Crest, if you're somebody who's going to be doing Heroic Raid or higher, you should see those Drake's and Whelpling's Crests and be like, yeah, like I can get a modest upgrade out of using this, right? I'm going to use it. Those crests are much less precious than the aspects in the Worm's Crests, and so they should be used much more freely. I think that's it for my tips and advice for what to do with gearing this patch this time around. Note that a lot of embellishments have changed. Stuff, even in the past couple weeks, a lot of things have changed. Your Wowhead guide or whatever for your spec may not have updated yet as well. There was a Spore Cloak nerf, so do be careful with what you actually do commit your first craft to. My suspicion is that for most players, your best first crafts are going to be your 2 embellished items rather than something like a 2-hander, which a lot of people crafted, say, at the start of 10.0. But this time around, with the way the timing's working out, I think you're just going to want to slam 2 embellished items and either put Enchanted Aspect Crest on them, or a free Enchanted Worm's Crest, or sometimes even if you don't have access to a free Enchanted Worm's Crest, you might just craft it natty, right? Craft it without any optional reagent in this slot, and then upgrade it later with an Enchanted Aspect Crest in a future week. Pretty rare for that to be right, but if embellishments are really bad for your spec, that could be the best way to do it. If that's the case, then going after one of those free Enchanted Worm's Crests from the Renown track would potentially be even higher value for you. So get to seed farming. Get out there and farm your Emerald Dream rep. You know, don't do that. Don't do that unless you are raiding in a really, really competitive way and you need that gear on the first week instead of on the third or whatever. And then, yeah, with your tier, just, again, be careful with using the Revival Catalyst early. Sort of the disaster case would be catalyzing like a Heroic Helmet on the first week to get you 2-piece. And then the second week, you see Mythic tier Helmet out of your Great Vault, right? And you're just like, you know, that is a catastrophe because you could otherwise have taken that and then you're one off of 4-piece and you're guaranteed to get 4-piece on the third week with the next catalyst charge, even with no other help, right? So do think about what you're doing there. Try not to catalyze gear that isn't on the highest track that you're going to be able to reasonably access, right? Like if you are going to be getting myth track items on your character, don't catalyze hero track gear on the first week, even if it's really tempting, unless you really, really, really want it. But with stuff like your Revival Catalyst charge, because you're only getting 1 every 2 weeks, and with stuff like Crests, because you're only getting 6 upgrades instead of 10 per week, and you need a lot more of them than you did last patch, these resources, you should kind of take your instinct of using them a bit more freely and instead kind of tone it back a little bit and be like, all right, you know, for my medium-term character power level, it's actually pretty important that I don't send these on like really, really frivolous items. Of course, if you're waiting for the perfect item, you know, that's also going to be bad. You do have to actually use this power level at some point in the first couple of weeks, or else you may as well not have had it, right? So don't hoard it, but do think carefully about both of those resources because they are both more precious than they were. Well, obviously, Revival Catalyst didn't exist last season, but the crests are more precious than they were last season is the one thing that I think that would be my core piece of advice to people. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope it helped. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or any other tips or anything like that. I'll try and get in there and answer some of the top upvoted ones and stuff. Or if the top upvoted ones are just good things to add that I forgot to put in this video, you know, look at those and consider them additions to this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.